Growing up, I never questioned what love looked like because I saw it every morning in my father's eyes. He wasn't a man of many words, but when he smiled, it was enough. Every bruise I brought home, every broken heart I cried over, he'd just sit beside me, quiet, patient, and safe. I used to think all dads were like that. Steady, gentle, the kind who could fix anything with a screwdriver and a soft laugh. But the truth is, I didn't realize how rare that kind of love was until after he was gone. It happened 3 months after his funeral. I was cleaning out the attic, the smell of old wood and dust filling the air, when I found a small wooden box tucked under the floorboards. Inside it, a stack of yellowed envelopes, a faded photograph, and a single birth certificate with my name on it. But something was wrong. The father's name wasn't his. I froze, staring at the paper as my heartbeat echoed in my ears. It was like the world had shifted, quietly, cruelly, and all the things I thought I knew about my life began to blur. I picked up the photograph. It was old, black and white, a woman who looked like my mother standing beside a man I didn't recognize. He was holding a baby. Me. The handwriting on the back said only, "For Emma when she's ready." When she's ready? What did that mean? I sat there for a long time, clutching that picture, until the evening light spilled across the attic floor, turning everything golden, fragile, unreal. I thought of the man who raised me, the one who taught me to ride a bike, who stayed up with me when I had nightmares, who danced with me in the kitchen while pancakes burned on Sunday mornings. Could it really be true that he wasn't my real father? And if he wasn't, why didn't he ever tell me? That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept hearing his voice in my head, calm, kind, patient. "You don't need to know everything, Emma," he used to say. "Some truths are better found when you're ready to hold them." And now I wondered, was this the truth he meant? The photograph lay beside me on the nightstand. Her eyes, his arms, my small face caught between them. It felt like looking at a story I had lived in, but never really known. I didn't know what I would find next, or if I even wanted to know, but something deep inside told me I had to look. Because sometimes, love hides itself behind the quietest lies and still finds a way to be true. I couldn't stop thinking about that picture. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw their faces. My mother, smiling shyly, and that man holding me like I was something breakable and precious. He looked nothing like the man I called Dad. The next morning, I drove to Mom's house. The same porch, the same wind chime he'd hung years ago, still sang softly in the breeze. She opened the door, her face a mix of surprise and something else, something like fear. I held up the photograph, my voice barely above a whisper. "Mom, who is he?" For a moment, she didn't speak. Her eyes searched mine, trembling slightly, as if she'd been waiting years for that question. She walked past me, sat down at the kitchen table, and pressed her hand against her chest. She said, "You found the box, didn't you?" I nodded, unable to trust my voice. She closed her eyes, a tear slipping free before she could stop it. She said, "His name was Michael. He was your biological father." The words felt heavy, strange, like hearing my own story told in someone else's voice. "Then why didn't you ever tell me?" I asked. She smiled sadly, her hands folded together like she was praying for the right words. "Because love doesn't always follow rules, Emma, and sometimes the man who gives you life isn't the one who gives you love." She looked toward the old photograph on the wall, the one of my father and me at the park, both laughing, my hair tangled in the wind. She whispered, "Your dad knew. He knew from the very beginning." I froze. He knew? She nodded slowly. "He met me after Michael left. I was broken, lost, scared, and you were just a few months old. I told him everything, and he still wanted us?" She said, "He didn't just want us, he chose us." Her words sank deep into me, heavier than truth, lighter than forgiveness. All my life, I thought love was about blood, about who you belonged to. But maybe it was about who stayed, even when they didn't have to. I asked, "Did Michael ever try to find me?" Mom shook her head. She said, "He wrote a few times. Your dad kept the letters. Said he'd give them to you when he thought you were ready." Her voice cracked, but he never did. I felt the tears rise before I could stop them. Not out of anger, but because I finally understood the silence he carried all those years. He wasn't hiding the truth out of shame. He was protecting my peace. Mom reached across the table, her fingers brushing mine. She said, "He loved you, Emma, more than anything. He used to say, 'You may not share his blood, but you share his heart.'" And in that moment, I realized she wasn't wrong. I left her house with the photograph tucked safely in my bag and a weight in my chest that was both sorrow and gratitude all at once. The man in the photograph had given me life, but the man I called Dad had given me everything else. I didn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw my dad's face. Calm, quiet, kind. And behind that face, a truth he'd carried alone for my entire life. The next morning, I drove to his workshop, the small shed behind our old house that still smelled like sawdust and oil. Everything was exactly as he left it. The old radio, the coffee mug with a chip on the rim, and a shelf full of labeled boxes. I didn't even know what I was looking for, only that something inside me said, "There's more." And then I saw it, an old metal tin on the highest shelf, covered in dust. Inside, wrapped in a faded blue cloth, were the letters, each one written in the same looping handwriting, "To Emma." My breath caught. The letter was full of small details. How he used to walk by our street just to see if the lights were on. How he'd leave gifts in the mailbox on my birthdays, signed "A Friend." I remembered those gifts. The storybooks, the tiny wooden horse. Dad always said they were from neighbors, but now I knew the truth. I read through each one, tears blurring the ink. In every letter, Michael apologized, not for leaving, but for not being brave enough to stay. He said he watched me grow up from a distance, and that the man who raised me was the better father, the better man. "If he ever lets you read these," one letter said, "please tell him thank you for giving you the life I couldn't." I pressed the paper to my chest, trembling. I could almost hear my dad's voice again, that quiet, steady warmth. He must have read these, one by one, before hiding them away. He didn't keep them from me out of fear. He kept them out of love. I imagined him sitting here in the same spot, reading those words, knowing he wasn't my real father, but loving me the same, maybe even more because of it. I whispered, "You didn't need to protect me, Dad. You were always enough." The letters were soft, almost falling apart from age, but to me they felt alive, like two men's hearts beating in the same space, both bound by the same love for one girl, one by blood and one by choice. By the time I finished reading, the sun had set. I sat there in the dim light, surrounded by sawdust, silence, and two fathers' ghosts, one who gave me life and one who gave me everything else. And for the first time, I felt grateful for both. I didn't go home that night. I sat in my car outside the workshop for hours, the letters resting in my lap like something sacred. Every word I read felt like it had been waiting for this moment, for me to finally see my life from the outside, through both of their eyes. When I finally looked up, the stars had begun to fade behind the soft gray of dawn. I whispered into the quiet, "Dad, I wish I had known." My voice cracked, the words trembling against the steering wheel, because what hurt the most wasn't the secret itself. It was that he had carried it alone, so I could live without the weight of it. I drove to the cemetery as the sun began to rise. His grave was simple, just his name and the words "beloved father and husband." I knelt down, tracing the letters with my fingers, the grass still wet with morning dew. "You should have told me," I whispered, my throat tightening. "You didn't have to protect me from love." I pulled out one of Michael's letters, the one that said, "Thank him for me," and placed it against the headstone. I said, "He did. He thanked you through me." The wind moved gently through the trees. like the earth was breathing beside me. I thought about all the years I took his love for granted, the hugs I shrugged off as a teenager, the times I said, "You're not listening," when he was just trying to understand. And all I wanted was one more chance, to tell him he had been enough, more than enough. I remembered his last words to me in that hospital room that smelled faintly of antiseptic and rain. He had smiled through his pain and said, "Emma, promise me you'll keep your heart soft. The world needs your softness." I didn't realize until now that's exactly what he had done his whole life. He'd loved me quietly, without needing to be known or thanked. He chose to stay in every moment, every memory, every quiet act of care. And I never told him I knew how deeply that choice mattered. I closed my eyes, the morning wind brushing my face, like his hand once did when I was little. "I love you," I whispered, even if I didn't say enough. The words left my lips like a prayer, one that I hoped could still reach him somehow. As I stood to leave, I glanced back one last time. The letter on his grave fluttered in the wind. A piece of paper bridging two lives, two fathers, and one endless love. And in that moment, I realized something. I didn't need to choose between them. I was loved by both, and that was enough. Weeks passed after that morning at the cemetery, but something inside me had shifted forever. The ache was still there, it always would be, but it no longer hurt the same way. It felt quieter now, softer, like grief had turned into gratitude. I spent my days going through old home videos, the grainy ones he'd filmed on that clunky camcorder he loved. There I was, 6 years old, running through the sprinklers while he laughed behind the camera. His voice, steady, full of joy, echoed through the speakers. "Careful, Emma, you'll touch a cold." And then my small voice, laughing back, "It's okay, Daddy, you'll fix it." I smiled through the tears. That was always his way, fixing things, even when he couldn't fix himself. And now, somehow, he had fixed me too. Not by being perfect, but by being present. A few days later, I decided to visit the ocean, the place he used to take me when life felt too heavy. I stood barefoot on the sand, holding one last letter in my hand, the only one I hadn't opened yet. It wasn't from Michael. It was from him. It was dated 3 weeks before he passed. His handwriting was shaky but familiar, each word written with love that refused to fade. "Emma," it began, "if you ever find the letters, promise me one thing. Don't be angry. I wanted to tell you, but I didn't want that truth to steal what we already had. I may not have given you life, but you gave mine meaning. Every moment with you was a gift, even the quiet ones, even the hard ones. And if love is measured by choice, then I chose you, every single day." My tears fell onto the page, blurring the last line until I could barely read it. So if one day you ever wonder who your real father is, look in the mirror and remember the one who stayed. I pressed the letter to my heart and let the wind take it, watched it dance through the air before landing softly on the water, floating away until it disappeared. And in that moment, I felt him. Not in the sky, not in the sea, but right there, inside me. He wasn't my real father, by blood, but by every measure that mattered, he was the only one who ever could be. The man who stayed, the man who chose me, the man who taught me what love really means. I whispered into the wind, "Thank you, Dad." And for the first time since he was gone, I felt whole again. Because family isn't always written in our DNA. Sometimes it's written in the quiet choices that shape who we become. And I am who I am because he loved me like his own.